Okay. Check, check. Okay.
I'm
Check,
here.
check. Okay.
I'm
Check,
here.
check. Okay.
We got echo.
Yeah, I know why. Sorry about that, folks. I forgot to turn down the volume on the Twitch stream there, so I'll have to do all that. I guess maybe I should
Love that OBS.
Well, I mean, I'm learning to love it. Learning to love it. So it's been a couple weeks.
Yeah.
What's you were in Oak Ridge for a while, and we couldn't get together, which was
Nope.
fine.
Yeah, I was actually in Alcoa when we would have been scheduled to do our thing last week. So
Yeah, so whatever. This is thank you for your time as you give it, Billy.
if it matters, I was hanging out with atheists.
Oh yeah, was this your sister?
That was at my sister's house. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, we should get her. What's up, Ed?
Yeah, it had been her and not the rest of the family because they go to sleep.
But I'm just saying, like she might be interested in this podcast. Maybe if she were to chat in, since you have an atheist sister, I'm sure you've had some conversations with her already. In this regard, have you?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that she and I can have more honest conversations than my two brothers and I because of her atheism as such, her non-belief in things that I'm claiming to, that I'm professing, etc. Her non-belief doesn't interfere with the topics that we talk about. My brother's desire to prove that he believes gets in the way of being able to have honest conversations about politics, even church stuff. My other brother is he's got a new wife. She's been around. I mean, it's been 5 years now, I think, but she's been around for a little longer than that. They started going to church, and he listens to a lot of right wing, but not the traditional right, if that's the thing, right wing talk radio stuff.
So you mean not like here in Knoxville, it would be WNOS,
Yeah.
I guess, where they had Rush Limbaugh was on for years from 12 to 3.
Yeah, he was not a Rush Limbaugh guy. He was Neil something or other.
And, Neil Bortz. I mean, but it's Neil the Bortz. Same. It's all the same network, right? So yeah.
Feels that way. Yeah. So he, that's his, and he's always right. Because he's always done the thinking. Also because he's a lot louder than me.
How is that possible, Billy?
Trust me, when I was growing up, I never got heard because I was the quiet one.
You don't. So you don't speak with pastoral authority.
I don't have the volume and wind capability that my brother has.
So the volume and wind beats pastoral authority.
It's it's the machismo thing,
Yeah.
If I'm loud and big, then you've got to obey me. So we talk about good things like Jeeps and Harleys and stuff like that.
Just don't go there. Sometimes it's best.
And if he does go there, if he does go there, I just let him ramble and I don't try to fix it. There's no point.
Oh, that's sad that there's no point.
It is. But and my other brother, we talk about the Pirates and the Steelers. He doesn't like hockey, so I never have to talk about hockey. But, we talk about sports and some things like that. And he'll ask me about the church and things, but he kind of goes to well, my sister and I both agree that it's very cultish kind of a church that, the pastor is elevated above humanity in some way. And, if the pastor came to see you, then it was because you were privileged and not because you were a person, and they don't believe women should be in the pulpit and that kind of stuff. And that's just
right.
nonsense.
I mean, it's just patriarchy, authority stuff.
It's nonsense.
Yeah.
And my sister-in-law really wants to have those conversations because she just wants to connect, and that's her thing to connect with. But it's I just
It becomes
I know I will
antagonistic.
disappoint her. Well, I know I will disappoint her because I'm not going to say what she wants to hear.
Right.
You know, she'll ask me about so and so and this theologian and that theologian. I'm going, I think they're quacks, but okay.
Yeah, right. Well, so we're kind of we're gonna at least go down your sister's line of thinking a little bit. I'm sure at one point she deconstructed.
That would imply that she was ever constructed. I don't.
Interesting. Mm.
I don't feel like she ever. I mean, she did kind of occasionally. She was baptized as an infant. She,
So
that that's not her.
was put in the church. Was maybe didn't go to church often as a
Occasionally,
child.
but she was a very independent child,
Sure.
and she, from very early age. I mean, like 4 years old, she was questioning things like, "What do you mean I can't do that because I'm a girl?" And that was 1964.
Right.
Uh, so
Well,
she never really had any belief in religious thoughts of any kind that I ever remember. She did go to things like Vacation Bible School and she went to one at the Baptist church where the pastor there told her, "You're going to hell because you read Darwin." And my sister's a voracious reader, um, and I never think that she would have ever claimed any faith, Christianity or otherwise,
that's interesting.
as an identity for herself.
So for me, there was no other information present
Right.
or a not even it wasn't it was almost as if questioning it would be it just didn't exist. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't it was we just all believed this is what we did, and up until the point for me at least, well, I guess we can get into it as we watch their video, but like for me, my deconstruction began early, uh, right after I got presented my Bible as becoming a full fledged member of the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So, and the one other thing before we get started on this, just related to, when your deconstruction started, you were invested in the church because your family
uh,
was
Man, no, okay.
very
Listen,
active.
I want to be very, very clear on this. I wasn't just invested in church because of my family, but my family, man, my grandparents were,
Yeah.
they were like big dogs in the circle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking
Yeah.
about like maybe not founding members, but close to founding members. I don't know. Maybe they were founding members. Um, you know,
Were they there when the beginning of the Oak Ridge started? Were they there in the beginning?
in the beginning, yeah, I really don't know. I would have to ask my parents about that. Listen, they were OGs, Trinity. They'd seen many building growth, much building growth, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly.
we're a part of
So
a.
what I was going to say is I had a very different experience than you did when it came to the church. The church was there for us, but it wasn't like my parents were. We got to be up and be at church every Sunday and all that stuff. Um, it was not. That was not it. I was involved through the Boy Scouts. I was involved because I had some friends. I was gone from the church during the time that you were the age when I was your youth director, and I came back to the church late in high school through the youth group. So
Right.
it was not. There was no theory that Billy was going to become a pastor someday.
Interesting. Yeah. So like your
Yeah,
calling came later. You were never coerced,
correct. I was
and
working in. Yeah,
yeah, and so again, I don't want to like Trinity United Methodist Church was a place where I had a lot of people I loved, right? Like, and it wasn't just my
yeah,
family. I mean, it was extended family. I mean, we're going to talk about some of these people probably maybe over next couple of conversations. But like, golly, I loved uh, Miss Libby and Mr. Jane, you know, and
Oh, what wonderful people. Yeah.
yeah, and I love the Wyricks, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, these people are God, the kindest, like people that you did want to stand next to you when you're doing things that were important, kind of people,
Yes,
like people that
that's right.
supported you. And so, like, this, this is where, I don't want like people to, I don't want people to think my deconstruction was like this. I came from this really angry, bad experience. I didn't, you know, I,
Right. Yeah.
I had little clues along the way, and then when we get to, well, again, we'll talk. He'll talk about some of this stuff, but for me, my deconstructing started the day I actually got my Bible, and I'll flesh that idea a little bit more out. But in third grade, I guess is when they take you through the little, what do you even call it?
Well, confirmation class would
Confirmation class. Yeah,
happen usually when you're 12, 13, 14 years old in the United Methodist Church, certainly.
yeah.
But oftentimes we would give, it was kind of a tradition back then for the church to give third graders, and that's because you learn to read now,
Hmm.
a Bible, just because
Right.
they moved into third grade.
We can
Yeah.
read, but
So you usually got the young reader's Bible.
yeah, well, and this one was called the Good News Bible, I believe. It even had some pictures in it for some
Oh,
fun.
yeah, the paraphrase. Yeah, it's a paraphrase. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly, but so you get when you go through the confirmation class, you kind of put your brain into this like academic place, right?
Hmm.
It was the first time in my life I started thinking about the Bible in an academic sense. So really, confirmation class kind of sent me down this path in the first place because up until then it was like, yeah, Jonah was in the well for 3 days. Yeah, you know what I
Right.
mean?
These were good stories. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm a kid before that. Like I'm just coming out of believing in Santa Claus, right? And so like
That's right.
okay, let's take a look. Oh my lord, I
I
just
saw
looked.
it.
Yeah, man, we got we got a live one.
Carla
uh,
says third grade was confirmation at Trinity.
Yeah. Okay. So confirmation was third grade, and yeah, I
And
don't
I'll address
think.
the one question about baptism is there's two kind of theories of baptism. Infant baptism is a part of a theory that is more through the mainline churches like United Methodist, Lutheran, Catholic, uh,
Sure,
some of those.
I was
Uh,
christened.
the You were not in the United Methodist Church christened.
What? I
We
wasn't
don't do
at
that.
the. Hold on. When they put water on my head when I was an infant.
That's baptism.
Okay, so like my understanding was there was kind of like a two-part process. You get baptized or christened, right? And then you kind of finish your training, and that's kind of what confirmation is. And then you become a full
Confirmation
member
is you
after.
accepting the promise that was given at baptism. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like a two-part process, I guess, in the Methodist Church.
Yeah, and most mainline denominations. The
Yeah.
evangelicals, the Catholic, the Baptists, they see baptism as an act that a person does in professing their faith, whereas we teach, and most Christianity denominations around the world teach, that baptism is the initiating act of God in a person's life. Therefore, baptism at infancy and no rebaptism necessary. It's God's act, so no need to change, no need to fix it. Uh, you go to a Baptist church, they'll want you to join the church by getting baptized because you're professing your faith now in that church. Um, so there's a difference in theology about what baptism is, and there's kind of really, from my reading over the years, really kind of two schools of thought. And I'm sure that there are Baptists that would argue with me about my interpretation of theirs, but it is
Well, I mean,
basically that. So,
eventually
but I
that
don't want to get too
yeah,
much.
eventually that becomes a problem for me too when you have all these people bickering over what is the right way, right? But
Christening
that's
is not something, and I don't remember Wrong Latitude's name, but christening is not something that that when we sprinkle water on the baby, it is baptism. We do not call christening. It is not a naming. Christening is what you do when you put a champagne bottle over a ship's bow.
okay, all right, yeah, fair
And
enough.
I've not had one parent. I've not had one parent that's asked me to do that.
Yeah, okay, that's funny. I think my parents always called it a christening.
Yeah, people misname a lot of things, but that's not what your pastor was doing.
All right, if mom ever watches this, we can just tell her she's wrong.
I'm
Yeah,
happy to do that.
yeah. All right,
And then
so
I'll run.
um, I almost want to keep this crazy guy in the YouTube chat running just because I am like it is so
He probably doesn't even know what the mark of the beast actually is, that it's really about a coin. So,
he probably does. I mean, he probably doesn't know. I mean, this obviously we got some crazy stuff, but it's fun. It's kind of fun to see it for a second or two. I guess maybe I should try to ban it, but I don't know how to do that on YouTube. So
yeah,
hopefully,
just let it go.
we'll just let it go.
He's got his thing. He's ruining John Wesley's fine name. But other than that,
Well, yeah, and we'll talk a little bit maybe about that was one thing I remember in confirmation is Wesleyanism versus Calvinism, right?
oh yeah,
So
and that's something that in the video that we'll talk about
yeah,
too. So
I want to go ahead and let them start talking so we can kind of riff on them for a little bit.
Rhett McLaughlin, welcome to
not
the
a
show.
branded barcode.
Thanks for having me, man.
I can't believe
You hear it
you
okay?
nearly made us change this tabletop to something cleaner.
We do have something that's more professional.
This is beautiful.
I mean, welcome to our space.
I guess
Yeah,
maybe
thanks
for the
for-
people who I did pull this up just so here are these folks. This is Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor is a famous atheist conversationalist, and he is a very young dude, and he's very sharp, and he's caught the attention of a lot of people who like to get on the internet and think deeply about philosophical issues. And if you look at his stuff here, it's not just like religious stuff. It's sometimes it's like talking about consciousness, right, or just like knowledge or string theory, right? So that's Alex O'Connor, and I've watched a lot of Alex O'Connor. I can't say I've watched all Alex O'Connor because there's just so much to watch on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then we have on the other end we have Mr. Rhett McLaughlin, and Rhett McLaughlin is of Rhett and Link fame. These are the guys right here. Of course, he looks a lot different now. His hair is longer.
Quite a bit long ago. Yeah,
He has the same hairstylist as me a little bit.
that's right.
Which is to say not to have a stylist at all, and just like let it go and whatever.
I bet you he has a stylist.
He's from North Carolina. I think that's kind of a thing to maybe know that we're in the Bible Belt area still. He was an engineer, and then they started like their YouTube stuff and Good Mythical Morning, which that is not like it's not necessarily religious, right?
No, they're just having fun.
Yeah, it's just like what's the worst condiment?
What's the best hot dog? And can we tell which one of these is the right donut from that place? They're funny.
Yeah, they're comedians or whatever. But they were also at one point involved in Campus Crusade. Well, I don't want to scroll through all of what good content. Just scrolling through Wikipedia as fast as I can. But anyway,
right. Well,
the
Campus Crusade thing we'll talk about.
A thing to know is that they are big deal YouTubers. 19.2 million big deal like YouTubers, right? So these are people that are more than making a living, on YouTube, right?
Yeah. Wesley understood love your neighbor, I'm sure.
Wesley Curry. Do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think that he's a Stephen Curry fan, or he's like actually? Because what if he's like a Wesleyan Methodist that's also a Steph Curry fan, and that's how
He does not sound like that.
he got his screen name.
Yeah.
Two lifelong friends talking about life for a long time. Oh,
That is their tagline, sort of.
can't see.
Rhett and Link.
Jessica saying you can't even see the YouTube chat really from the FB live. Kind of
Yeah, Jessica, I sent you on Messenger a copy of it. You might.
Yeah,
find
you have to watch the actual like stream to see it in there because where I've got all the chats together, YouTube and Facebook and Twitch all together.
Well, I took a screenshot of that and sent it to her through Messenger.
Yeah, it's crazy town. So all right, so let's continue on with Rhett and Alex.
Yeah.
Thanks for hosting me here. I usually open the show by saying something like, thanks for being here or welcome to the show. And I've done that on a few occasions in other people's sets and other people's houses, and they kind of look at me a little bit blankly. So I'm sure you know what I mean, but thanks for having me. You got a lot of character on this table. This is like a who's who of
Early YouTube.
decades ago.
Yeah.
You were pointing out like the Fine Bros here, and I saw like I Just Seen over there. It's like a real old school thing. Why did it stop? What happened?
We kind of ran out of people to talk to. Honestly, the guest-based, we started our podcast as a guest-based show.
Yeah.
We thought that we would be like the Mark Maron for internet personalities.
Sure.
There's two issues. Number one, there's only so many, especially back in the day, only so many interesting internet personalities to talk to that were also willing to come into our studio out here. And then there's some dynamic that happens when two people are interviewing one person.
Yeah.
And we were like, this is not.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of thing before. Like a lot of other shows have multiple hosts, but there's like one main
We
guy.
should take
maybe,
note if we have guests.
Having two people, it's
Yeah.
kind of tricky. There are podcasts that
Right.
do it.
Link and I are always both trying to be the main guy. That's our problem.
Yeah.
We've made a
His
career
Facebook
of it,
view.
but
Yeah.
on a podcast,
It's the same thing interviewing two people. I've done that a few times as well, like when I had Cliff and Stuart Connectly on, and
Yeah.
they work quite well as a pair, but it's quite difficult to know like where to frame your
and we're on the other side of that quite a bit, right? I mean, like
I bet, yeah.
99% of any interviews that I'm a part of, Link's always right here. You know,
Yeah.
we have to sit as Rhett and Link. We're very precise about
Yeah,
it.
do you feel a bit naked, sat on your own in a situation?
No, I
like
enjoy
this?
it.
Yeah. Well, I prefer it this way because I also prefer being naked because especially with you.
I don't think
because
that's what he said.
There's something that gets lost in if you really start getting into
think
the
he's being
weeds of
clever.
a conversation with somebody and you start thinking, oh gosh, I better ask the other guy a
Right.
question. That you can avoid or sort of not manage to really get into the weeds with a particular person. Now, you have one of the biggest shows on YouTube with Good Mythical Morning. And in my experience, with any kind of YouTube followership, you can't say anything without annoying somebody. We've already offended somebody in the comment section. You, with one of the biggest shows on YouTube, decided not too long ago, a few years back, to start talking about your spiritual deconstruction, as you call it, and your move away from Christianity. That must have been quite the move for you. And it's one of the reasons I'm interested in speaking to you. And hopefully, I know you've spoken a bit about it on various shows and things, but my audience is really interested in philosophy and theology. I'm sure they're fascinated by some of the intricacies of your thoughts on this kind of stuff. But when you start thinking, I want to say something about this, like, why? You've got a good thing going, man. Why are you going to mess it up with all this religious stuff?
Yeah. Tell me about it. I started talking to Link about how I thought we needed to share our story, mostly because of how much we had disclosed about ourselves over the years. Our podcast, even starting with this, when we were interviewing people, we would ask all these really personal questions, ask them about their background. We would give a little bit of our background, but we would leave out this really foundational part of who we were. And then even in all the interviews that we would do about our career, we would basically, the story would go, so we went to engineering school. We were engineers for a while, and then we became YouTubers. It was a very simple, easy to understand story. When the reality was, well, all throughout that time, we were involved in Christian ministry. We were very involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. And in between being engineers and being professional YouTubers, we were professional Christians. We worked full time with Campus Crusade for Christ as, campus missionaries, for lack of a better word.
I would like to like differentiate between professional Christian and like a pastor, right? Or is that maybe the
Well,
same thing?
I,
I mean,
well, I mean, in a sense, I could see that as the same thing. Full time ministry is the phrase I would normally use. I wouldn't use the
mhm.
word professional Christian. That sounds
It
a
sounds
bit odd.
yeah, but I think he's making a
But on
distinction, right? Like
I
he's definitely
I
making a
think that's true.
distinction here. I,
I think in some ways he is. One of the things I take away from Rhett, and I've watched some of this video, but also I've seen some other things that he has done on that set right there. Um, he, I do think he would make a distinction between the person serving in a full time ministry role like that, uh, because of he wasn't there to do pastoral care. He wasn't there to do some of the other aspects of that job that a pastor does. He was there to help people learn to evangelize. So he's in training people, um, and also, uh,
yeah, he has a more like distinct goal. I think he talks about it here in a little bit, so I guess we can just keep
yeah, and that comes from the Campus Crusade stuff,
going. Right, which
and
is
there's a lot of issues with Campus Crusade.
sure.
And our ministry was essentially using our comedy to help Christian students figure out how to talk about their faith.
Huh.
So we didn't put on like big, bait and switch evangelistic shows that you were supposed to invite like non-Christians to. We were like, hey, let's do something where we kind of come into their typical weekly meeting and we do something fun that it's got music and video and that's helping them kind of see differently the way that they approach evangelism. And the only reason that I'm doing what I do today is because of my background, because of all the experience that we had coming up in that, in that setting. So it just felt disingenuous to not talk about it.
Yeah.
It just began to, it was like, it began to kind of press on me. Like, this is such and also in the meantime, I had been through this complete deconstruction and essentially a deconversion. And so it's like, I kind of have to tell the story of the background while simultaneously telling the story of why I no longer believe it.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like we got to go out there and like get on this. There was, by the way, not really a deconstruction train to get on at the time. It wasn't, I mean, there were some people who had talked about it, but I wasn't paying attention to that. I wasn't interested in that. I didn't know who had deconstructed publicly. I didn't know much about the word deconstruction. So it wasn't I want to be a part of a movement or I see myself as part of a movement or a spokesperson for that. It was like, we need to be honest with our audience.
Yeah.
Let's just tell the story.
Campus Crusade for Christ.
So like for me, this was never about just being honest with my audience. Like if we're talking about like, my music career.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
That doesn't mean that I don't like that state, right? That state of being, if that makes sense. Like I'm good with them knowing.
Okay.
But I did know that in this area of the world that it was going to like rub some people away. And when I say rub some people away, some people it rubs them a real bad way, right? Like a real.
Yeah. Well, there's this. As I told you, I've had a guy in one of my Bible studies is like, well, all atheists hate Christians. They hate God. They hate. And I was like, I think you're
yeah, it's not about
really
hate.
overstating
It's not a hate for. I think you can't hate something you don't believe in, right? Like we might hate like bad reasoning in the name of, and when I say bad reasoning in the name of, that can be a lot of things. There can also be good reasoning in the name of. So I don't want to, you know, I'm not trying to like say things that are in the name of are all bad. I'm just saying like, when you see bad things in the name of, then it tends to drive you away, right? Or at least
Sure, yeah. I think that's true in a lot of ways. Yeah.
right. And, for me, again, my deconstruction started when I was young, right? But like speaking about it publicly, I don't know. For this project in particular, I want it to be more like how the farmers and the cowhands can be friends. You know,
Right. Yeah. That is our goal.
I don't have a goal to debunk Christianity by having conversations with my old youth pastor. That sounds like
That's right.
that
Yeah.
sounds like the worst,
Well,
most asshole thing I could think of. Uh,
well, there's some. I think when I was listening to Rhett talk about that answer to that question from Alex was that um, you know there was a consideration that he had to decide to make a statement that would be something that he knew there would be some backlash to, but he had to decide first off, would the backlash be that big? Secondly, did the viewers that he had care about that part of his life? And thirdly, was it important to him and his own integrity to tell that part of his story? And I think the answer to the question number 3 was yes, it was very important. Everything I've seen with him just being in conversation, not necessarily the gags they pull on the show, are just he's a genuine person.
right. I think that's also why this conversation, if we're getting outside of the inside conversation, but the outside conversation is this conversation shook up the YouTube Christian world, right? Now he's been talking about it for a while now, but like Alex O'Connor
Yeah.
is in the crosshairs of the apologists, right? So,
Yeah.
man, how cool is it? How cool is it? What's up, Jack Devani? To have a street preacher in our comments. Like we have a YouTube street preacher. Like the ones that are like
Yeah.
with the megaphones on campuses.
So yeah, on my campus we had a guy that came, called himself Brother
Easy to
Jim
check.
something or other, and Brother Jim was Brother Jim was this guy that came and he took up a spot in the campus somewhere that students would, and he would start ranting and preaching and doing all this stuff, and people would gather to listen to this, what most everybody thought was just this crazy nut. Nobody really listened to him, but it created, he said, he talked about the evil of cigarettes. Of course, he was on a college campus, so he talked about fornication, and a lot of the reaction to him was, this guy's just bizarre and nutty, and just trying to push buttons, and nobody really took him seriously.
Yeah. I mean,
even the Campus Crusade folks didn't take him
yeah,
seriously.
no. These folks are usually in need of some other kind of help. I mean, I don't know what's going on with them. I mean, they're the ones that like. I mean, they usually aren't that. They smell bad. Like that like. There's a lot to it. It's like there's a craziness in the eyes, of these folks, and
Yeah. But then there's when I was a youth director at Trinity, one of the things that one of the we were talking about a mission trip, or we were talking about that there was a particular brother who had his goal of mission trip was that we should go to the beach and do exactly what Rhett talks about doing, or go to the wonderful Gatlinburg and do the same thing. That Rhett, go out and preach on the streets was what he wanted us to do. And of course, that went over like a lead balloon from everybody in the youth group. And
I mean, the youth group is not trying to do that. I mean, there are some youth groups that will. I'm not saying that's the case for every youth group, but
it certainly wasn't ours.
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably talk about the differences a little bit between, like, a Methodist youth group and maybe a Southern Baptist evangelical one. Hold on, I've got to text my wife about getting the dogs. They have decided to join the podcast.
Well, she can hear you.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know if you never know. She's in and out of the.
Well, she just commented a second ago. So.
Oh, did she comment? I don't know. I wasn't paying that much of attention. I kind of lost my train of thought. I guess we can just get back on. We're exactly T-minus 7 minutes in only, and we're already 30 minutes past. So let's keep going.
Mm-hmm. What is that about?
Well, let's see if I can remember exactly, because I used to have to get up at the weekly meeting and say this. Campus Crusade for Christ is an interdenominational Christian organization founded in 1951 by Bill and Vonette Brooks.
Yes.
Wow.
Our philosophy is threefold: to win, build, and send. Win students to Christ, build them up in their faith, and send them out to continue the win, build, send process.
How's that working out for you?
Hey, it worked pretty well for a while, man.
Yeah. Well, you were pretty knowledgeable, right? Like, you would be able to talk to people and convert people. I mean, presumably that doesn't go away. Like, you've still got the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
You've still got it inside of you.
That the evangelical Christian part of my brain will never go away.
Yeah.
Is always there, judging the deconstructed Los Angeles YouTuber. I think so. I whenever I see somebody talk about me, and I try not to do that very often.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know, just being on your podcast and talking about it, like, we get, you know this game very well. You give you give the material, you provide the material for all the Christian reaction channels.
Oh, sure.
This is what they feed off of, right? This is what they want. If we're talking about this,
hold on, we do have to stop for some Alex O'Connor mustache commentary. I mean, it's like a young dude's thing right now. They stretching their legs on the mustaches and stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah, and then I mean,
I can't argue with you, Jack.
We've made that comment before.
They want to talk about us talking about it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'm listening to myself say things, and I'm like, oh, well, that's what they're going to say about this.
Yeah.
And I try not to calculate that too much and think about, you can drive yourself crazy, like, trying to, like, orchestrate all your words.
Yeah. But it's something you're always aware of as a public figure. Was most of the stuff that you were doing, like, was it biblical? Was it arguments for God's existence? Was it, like, what kind of approach were you taking? What's your, like, expertise when it comes to evangelism?
So with Campus Crusade for Christ, we would share something called the 4 spiritual laws.
4 spiritual laws.
And it was a little booklet, essentially.
You know about this?
Oh yeah, they were handed out all over campus, and I had friends who were in the Campus Crusade, and some of their techniques were, there were so many people that believed that these 4 spiritual laws were not, and way outside of Campus Crusade folks in some of the early churches, the churches that they saw those as the absolute, this is what's most important thing. And my experience with Campus Crusade was, as I said, I had good friends that were involved. I did a couple of things with them just because we went to a concert or something like that. I had a Bible study in the dorm that the guy who was leading it was a part of the Campus Crusade. He was the son of a Baptist pastor, but there were enough of us in there that could talk to him and say, we don't agree with you on that. And it was interesting, but one of the things that I learned after being around some of these folks was Campus Crusade really worked hard to try to get the kids that they were bringing in away from their churches. Because if they went back to their church in the summertime, they might hear things that didn't agree with Campus Crusade and their radical, weird theology that Wesley would love. And it was when I saw that they were literally telling them, "Don't go back to your church," I said, "Well, there's something wrong with this group," because every other campus ministry is trying to reconnect their students to a church or their church, and not trying to isolate them and make them be all about Campus Crusade. The other one that kind of does that is shoot, I've got folks in my church that are involved in it. Young Life.
Young Life, yeah. That was
yeah.
maybe Campus Crusade lighter version for also high school kids too.
High school, and now they're trying to get into middle schools. They're all
It started. I remember Young Life as a 6th grader. So you would have been dealing with me then, even. At one point, I was like, "Oh, but there's a bunch of cool kids going to this Young Life thing. I think I might want to go," but I never did.
Yeah, it's all about doing crazy fun things to get kids and create. I mean, you can't argue with their method. Is we want kids to feel free and comfortable with our leaders, so that they will open up to them and they can hear through them.
Got you.
But it is,
similar stuff.
But yeah, what it ends up doing, and they claim, "Oh no, we want our kids to go to their church. We want them to be involved in their youth. We want them to be involved in their church." But my experience has been that doesn't tend to stay. They tend to have one church or two churches that they really support,
they favor,
and they kind of funnel them into those.
Gotcha.
That Bill Bright, the founder of Campus Crusade, had put together, and it was essentially a gospel tract. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. All people have sinned, and it's the gospel, right?
Yeah.
And 4 laws, 4 spiritual laws. It was very like 1950s Christianity, but it was very effective because what it did is you had the ability, and of course I wouldn't like always break out the booklet. I would just maybe do it in the context of a conversation, but you might go out on. It sounds crazy when you think about it, but like we would go down to spring break at like Panama City Beach, and you got all these kids just partying on the beach, and we were like, well, we're going to go out on the beach and we're going to start spiritual conversations with people. And we're going to plant seeds in the least. And in the best case scenario,
guilt seeds.
We're going to bring someone to a point of decision. That's what you want to do. Bring them to that point of decision.
Plant those guilt seeds.
So a great question is, if you were
I think he saw it differently.
How certain are you that you would go to heaven? Right? I mean, that's
right.
a great,
it's heavy.
It's heavy. And usually if like,
because you might die from the drinking.
So, okay, right. So like it's still guilt seeds, right? This comes from an evangelical, like Southern Baptist place.
Yes.
In regards to like drinking and that kind of thing. Right. But they're planting some guilt seeds right now. Like he might think of it as,
and
or at the time.
If you think about it, when you were that age, college age,
right.
And you partook of things that had some mind-altering effect.
Right.
You thought about all kinds of things. You wondered about the universe. You wondered about whatever. That's what you do at that age.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. But
I think that what they tried to do was, okay, we've got the answers to this.
Well, they're putting that there, but I think also that doesn't take account for, if you're talking about spring break and you're talking about guys from North Carolina, we're talking about Florida. We're talking about North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida.
Myrtle Beach, Florida. Yeah.
Right? That's what we're talking about. And so like they're out at spring break with a bunch of partiers, things that culturally in certain, very influential areas of the states that they belong to are very conservative. And, they're, I don't know, what is it, like the Quakers do or whatever, maybe not the Quakers, the Amish, I guess. They have the thing where the kids go out and they party like crazy or whatever.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
yeah,
I think in some kind of ways they're looking for a version of that, right? So like you're out here partying, you're having a bad time, or you're having like if you're having a good time, you're probably not listening to them at all, right? But if you're having a bad time, because you can have a bad time when you're partying, right? Some things can go wrong, and then all of a sudden, here's
that girl didn't talk to me, and I get depressed. Or,
well, I don't know about that. I'm just saying, like like
I do.
People go out, they get drunk, they get in a fight, they lose all their friends, they stupid decisions are made like for spring break.
That's key. Stupid decisions.
Right. So when you
also drinking for 3 days solid, you also feel like crap.
So you feel like crap. You've made some bad decisions. You've probably hurt some people, because this is what these bad decisions are made of or whatever. And maybe it's even like real bad, like not even just bad, but like you got in a car wreck almost, and you hurt somebody. Hopefully not take their life, but I'm just saying, like in this scenario, right? Like it could be anything, and then these folks have been planting these seeds, right? And so you have that bad time, and they're like, "Oh, this was the answer. They were trying to tell me all along." Right?
Right. Yeah. And that's what Rhett is talking about, that it's all about for them planting seeds.
Right.
The evangelical Christian path is, they said those three things. He said,
sure.
I can't remember the phrase of them. That is all it's about. If you heard what he's saying is, we're gonna convert you. We're gonna train you.
He had
other people.
I'm going to stop you because he had some interesting ideas on converting people anyway and planting seeds, because we're coming from a evangelical Southern Baptist place, and predestination is a thing.
Yeah, and he gets into that. Yeah. It's very interesting.
All right.
I see that someone disappeared from our screen.
Oh, I finally figured out how to not have that guy. He's probably still going nuts over in the YouTube chat. If anybody wants to go to the YouTube page and see what old Wesley Curry II is saying, but I figured out how to. It wasn't hard.
Carla can totally tell us. I don't know if Carla's on Facebook, so she can tell us.
Yeah, and guys, sorry about the video being a little choppy. I have no idea what that's all about. I have a horse of a computer, and I thought I had enough memory to have all these tabs open, but maybe I don't. I don't know. Maybe it's on my end.
And and the second part of that is where I am, and we've been having storms, so it shouldn't affect yours.
Yeah, the storms. Yeah.
If I freeze up, it's probably that.
Yeah, and see, Ed, Ed says it's impossible not to use guilt or fear when the idea is either eternity with or God or not, right? So yeah. I mean, you're. Guilt is part of the, in my opinion, guilt is part of the equation, right? And guilt and fear is a part of the equation for, the early indoctrination for a lot of people. Now, luckily for me, it wasn't really all that. It was more like, this is a happy place with happy stories and happy people. But that's not to say that, once I got older and could notice when there was some really ugly behavior, I did notice. And that was kind of one of the things that put me on that path in the first place. But
yeah, let me say this. I think there are different ways that churches, and by that I mean the big church. I don't mean like this individual church and that individual. There are ways that different theological systems, systematic theology, develop and focus on, and are their agenda is a certain thing. That's what I was getting at with the three things that he mentioned that Campus Crusade was about. The conservative, fundamental, evangelical, quote unquote, Bible believing churches, which is not true. I mean, they're no more Bible believing than anybody else is. But their whole identity around what it is to be a Christian is not about how do you behave among people. It is about, as he's saying, it is only about getting people to get to heaven. And it isn't about building relationships. It isn't about building community. It isn't about making the world a better place, because you don't care about the world. You care about the afterlife. And I think Prince sang about that. So
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, the fear of missing out on the party. I don't know about the party would be what I'd call it, but I do think
Jesus
just
did.
I just think that there's a lot of fear in the unknown with death, right? And I think that
Well, absolutely. That's true.
so when you have a theology, it doesn't have to be Christianity, that says here is an answer to your most existentially dreadful questions about death, right?
Yes.
And then conversely, the kick in the nuts is you should believe this anyway, because otherwise you're going to hell.
That's right.
So,
And there's very definitely, as everyone here is pointing out, with this type of theology, there is a strong focus on. And I'm saying we don't focus on that. That is not something that is a part of our focus.
right. And we'll talk maybe a little bit about the Methodist denomination briefly, but there are people that would see the Methodist as a little bit like Christian light.
Yeah, well, they can think what they want, right?
Right? Yeah, I mean, but like
there are those people that think atheists hate everybody.
Hey, yeah, we're going to get into the denomination thing anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just move on with Rhett
yeah.
and Alex, and because they're going to get there, and we get a chance to talk about it then.
Partying in Panama City Beach, and you're like drunk, and so many students are sort of, day 3, day 4 at spring break, and they've just been pumping themselves full of alcohol, and they're literally, some of them are still having a ball, but some of them are like actively realizing that there's no fulfillment in the excesses, right? And they're like, it's like the perfect time to approach them.
Man, it's quite an existential moment, really.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen a lot of interviews with drunk people on the streets, and it can go one of two ways. There are like the funny ones when people are vulnerable in the sense that they might say something a bit stupid or whatever, and it makes for a funny viral moment. But also, the Christian outreach. I know people were doing that at my university too, where they used to sort of stand outside the nightclubs, and they weren't actually preaching or evangelizing. They would just hand out like water and biscuits and things. And I suppose it was like it's a Christian route, but
yes.
it is. I mean,
biscuits.
All of the vices sort of come out.
Well, Trinity, they had that little coffee joint for a while.
Yeah, that was cool. I wish I wasn't around for that, of course, but it was interesting how that, the pastor was leading that as very liberal, and some of the folks that were supporting it were not. It's very interesting.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was a point of contention. I was like headed out. I was on.
It was. You are correct. It was.
But it was very much a point of contention for like the the fuddy-duddies of that church,
senior citizens,
and that's what that church ended up being, and that's why it no longer exists. It was just fuddy-duddies to the end. Do you want?
Yeah.
So Ed threw a question. If you want to answer that one, winning souls to Christ isn't a goal of your church.
So first off, I can't win anything. And Rhett actually even may address this a little bit. Saving souls is not the work of the church. It's it is not what I do. But if people are going to come to a relationship with God, then they need to come to a relationship with people. And I've said before that for me it's about building the kingdom, so to speak. Jesus said in the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, the kingdom of God is at hand. There is this idea that all the church is supposed to do is worry about getting people to heaven. But the reality is, if that's all you're talking to them about, you're just preaching the same sermon, and the people are not ever going to grow, and they're not going to apply that faith into their lives. They're not going to take love and empower things. So our focus would be to develop disciples, followers of Jesus. As Shane Claiborne would say, red letter Christians, people who look at what does Jesus say about the poor? What does Jesus say about people who are hungry, people who are naked, people who are sick? He says, minister to them. So the goal of the church is to build the kingdom of Christ. Our mission statement in the United Methodist Church is to, and it comes directly from the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, to go into the world and make disciples for the transformation of the world.
Right.
So that is our goal.
Right. So,
it isn't.
You're not like trying to get as many up there as you can. It's not like a soul's drive.
Well, we certainly want to grow, and we certainly want as many as we can, but
I mean, a soul's drive.
I think there's
it's
a difference of, yeah. Again, I think that if you're the evangelical, so-called evangelical Christian, fundamentalist, then you get that push that there's this urgency that the world is going to end tomorrow. We have to get everybody to be saved, and it's our job to save them. And the way we do that is they're sinners who are flawed in every way, and they deserve hell, but Jesus can save them. Whereas my approach and the approach of many of my colleagues is, there's the urgency of love, compassion, empathy, caring for people, and the role of a pastor is not just to preach sermons, but also to build a community of believers in the midst of a world that is at best chaotic.
There you go. Good enough, Ed? It's gonna be good enough for Ed. Trust me. It's gonna be totally good enough.
He'll ask again later.
In the party atmosphere, everything about your inhibitions, and I feel like that is probably the place where Christ enters so many people. Like when people tell their stories about coming to Christianity, it's often that kind of situation, but writ large across their life. It's like I was in the dumps, I had nowhere to turn, and at the end of a night at the club, you're sort of in a sort of microcosm of a moment like that for the day. You're tired, the lights have come on, and everything is suddenly really ugly. When I was in Las Vegas, I remember I've been there once, and I showed up at night, and I thought, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. It was glamorous, it was glittering, it was beautiful. And then the morning I woke up relatively early because I was on UK time, and the whole thing was like baked in sunlight, and suddenly it all looked really silly. It looked silly and plastic. And my friend said it was a bit like at the end of a nightclub where the lights come on and you realize everything's actually been ugly the whole time, and you just sort of see it. And he's like, that's kind of what Jesus does. He just turns the light on and shows you that everything was ugly all along. Because I mean, Vegas is one of the most demonic places I've ever been to in my life.
That's a funny statement.
There's
an
emptiness there for sure.
I was there with the guy with there's a show called the Iced Coffee Hour, which I was on, and one of the hosts of that, he was sort of driving me down LA, and we went past what's the pyramid one called? The one that's like Egypt. I forget what the place is actually called.
But I don't know the name of it.
It's got this huge pyramid that shoots this massive beam of light up into the sky, right? And he said, oh, that's really interesting actually, because Las Vegas often gets these like swarms of locusts. I was like, really? They get swarms of locusts? He was like, yeah. And the crazy thing is, because this pyramid shoots up that massive beam of light, it's amazing. When it happens, they all like swarm onto
it. It's like a tornado.
And start going crazy. And I was like, so you're telling me that that swarms of locusts descend on Egypt in Sin City.
Yeah.
It was all getting a little bit biblical.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that is the perfect place to walk up to somebody and be like, do you think there's something more?
It is the Luxor.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think that one of the misconceptions about someone who, like me, was a person of faith, of Christian faith, and is no longer a person of Christian faith, or I've got some faith in things, but not really religious faith. Is that somehow the two alternatives are that life of excess and selfishness and like pleasure, or religious faith in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can throw people off a lot of times when I'm like, oh, I recognize I don't see it as necessarily like, well, one is right and one is wrong, but it's just like, yeah, clearly like a human that is simply focusing on pleasures like that ultimately end up just being, they become empty pretty quickly. Like that's just a universal truth. That's not like, you as a Christian don't have a universal hold on that truth. That's not just because it was mentioned in the Bible doesn't mean that that's the only place that truth shows up. Like it's a human experience, right? So now, as someone who doesn't really know what I think about God, I still recognize like the emptiness of a place like Las Vegas. But I'm also like, you know what? Maybe every once in a while I want to go experience some excess pleasures.
Yeah. Oh, it was fun.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not judge myself or judge others for it at the same time.
Alex,
Knowing that
his eyes
if I
popped
take the
up on that
perspective
one.
into that oh, I recognize the emptiness of this. Eating at a buffet. I mean, how many times can you eat at a buffet, right?
Yeah.
Before you're like, okay, get me out of the buffets. But I feel like, again, this is kind of the perspective that I think about the way that I thought about those students when I was there with the truth in my hand.
Mm.
I was like, there's two paths here. There's the
This is
path
an
that you're
interesting
on,
part of the
which is
conversation.
just self-sabotage, or there's Jesus. Never considering that, well, maybe there's a few more ways to think about these things.
Do you think there's pride in there? I mean, one of the worst sins a Christian can commit is the sin of pride. And I think they're constantly sort of battling.
So, he talks about like, students. And so he's going to go into this thing about, how he was a prideful Christian. And again, my way was a lot different than that, but I definitely remember like a moment where it all became really too heavy for me to talk to young people about it. Right. And do you remember the Morels?
Yes.
So Mark Morel was a little younger than me, by a couple years, I want to say, and he was in a group of kids that I was asked to be the chaperone for going to Resurrection and for the youth group at Trinity. I was a chaperone for the boys of our youth group.
And for those of you that don't know, Resurrection is a big youth event that our conference puts on every year that groups come, and it at its peak, it was averaging about 7 kids and the adults with them.
It was a lot of kids, a lot of pomp and circumstance.
Had a variety of speakers. Yeah,
speakers,
a lot of loud music.
Concerts. It's kind of the beginnings of, what you see at these mega churches now that do it every Sunday.
And it had the added bonus that you were going to a place like Gatlinburg,
right,
which had other things to do during your free time.
Yeah, you go shopping and like,
and
the big thing is
so
you're just around a ton of young people. Like that's the other thing. You're just around, like, it's like if you're a young man, you're like, there are girls around. Right?
That's right. And the messages were meant to draw young people. And it was interesting, the messages, some of the speakers were very, very fundamentalist, evangelical, conservative, and some of them were very, very liberal. Shane Claiborne was one. Duffy Robbins might have been around when you were doing
it. Anyway, so I'm there with these dudes, and like I didn't realize, like for me, I thought chaperone just like make sure they're not like doing something stupid, right? Which I don't know why they would pick
Right.
me to be the one to make sure people aren't doing stupid things because I'm like the king of doing
Well,
stupid.
the person that was wanting them to go and do evangelism on the beaches was also the one that stole a cassette tape. You remember those, right? At Gatlinburg
Wow.
during Resurrection.
I did not know that. Anyway, so yeah, this you weren't part of the youth group at this time. This was who was the youth director? I think this was the Burks.
Yeah, sounds like you were older, so
Yeah, this was the Burks still, or maybe they had Miss Wyrick had something to do with it. She was the one who asked me, and I'll do whatever she asked me to do. So, I love her, right? So,
yeah.
But I was there, and we're all like, I'm sleeping on like a hide a bed or whatever, and somewhere on the, and they're all talking. They're just up, they're being made to feel things, right? Like this is an intention. This is an intentional objective.
It's very well.
Like let's get them pumped up. Like pumped up on on these feelings, and like Mark, he had questions, man. And he was asking me, he's like, how do you know it's real? And I was just like, I did not know that this is what a chaperone meant.
Yeah. You thought you were there just to make sure they didn't jump off the balcony or something.
Yeah. Like, so you're not like sleeping in, sneaking out of the girls' rooms and stuff, like, so,
Right.
That's what I was supposed to be there for. I wasn't supposed to be there for, answering a heavy ass question like that. Right. And I remember it was like a moment where I was frozen, and I said, guys, I'm gonna tell you something. I don't know anything. I just know that like if you're good to people, it'll probably all work out. And that's what I said to him. Right? If you're good to people, it'll work out. I can't give you the answers. I don't know. And as it was coming out of my mouth, it was like, I'm saying I don't know. Right? Like, Ed will love that because it was me observing myself doing that. But it was just, I couldn't bring myself to saying, yeah, this is true. It was just more like, I just think if you're good to people, it'll work out.
And in the conversation that Rhett is about to get into, he talks about not just the pride thing, but the absolute, I know everything I say, everything I'm teaching is absolutely right.
Right. So like I didn't come from
correct.
I didn't come from that direction like he did at all.
No, and I didn't either.
Yeah.
That was not a part of our theology in the worldview that I had. I never believed that I was always right.
Sure.
Humility is kind of important.
Yeah, right. I mean, like they get into that, so let's just go ahead.
Against it, especially when you're in a position, I mean, let alone some of the people I talk to who have public platforms, constantly putting themselves in front of a microphone and answering people's questions and being constantly praised. It must be really difficult to not get prideful when it starts working. But even in an outreach situation like this, is there an element where it's sort of like not like I'm better than these people, but like look at me doing this good thing, walking into the depths of hell and harrowing it and getting everyone back to Christ?
Yes, I mean, I think that there is there's an element of sort of taking pride in the work that you're doing for God, even though you can easily give God the credit, be like the Spirit was working through me. Because if you know the code of humility, and you know how to talk about these things, but secretly you're thinking about how you're doing in relation to other Christians, and you're thinking about how they're doing in relation to you.
Yeah.
You can't. It's human nature. You're gonna do that. But I think there's another type of pride that I think back on those times. I remember a specific instance, and this is actually after I was no longer on staff with Campus Crusade, but I was still very active in the church, and I was leading a Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
And we had become friends with this couple that were Catholic, and in my estimation, Catholics weren't Christians. I mean, I was that type of evangelical.
Whoa,
Yeah,
really?
I was like, well, maybe there's some that actually have a relationship.
Even Alex O'Connor, who's world famous atheist, is like, yeah, you're one of those, huh? Right?
Yeah, you were way over there.
Yeah.
The first group that I ever heard that from was I was a pastor in the late 90s in Pikeville, Tennessee, and the Gideons. And I had Gideons in my church that were very active. So they invited me to this dinner, pastor's dinner. And I went and I was like, all this anti-Catholicism stuff was out. Oh my God, do you guys not know they're on the same side? That was just something that the only
Yeah.
idea
But
people felt that way.
this kind of feeling doesn't just extend to like Catholics or like there are, I don't know, what how many denominations are there now? 40,000, something like that, of Christianity.
It's,
Of-
it's a
it-
lot.
I don't.
And also, I would say that anytime, and Rhett talks about this real briefly, Campus Crusade claimed to be a non-denominational. Anybody that says they're non-denominational just means they're not connected to an organized unit of a denomination. They have their own denomination.
Right. They have their
They have
belief
their own
set.
set of beliefs, and this is the way we do things. And
Yeah, he
their
does talk about
polity,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, like just this whole. I wasn't like him in this way that I don't know if it was just something that was kind of like raised by my family or what, but just the fact that there's so many different churches, Christian churches, right out there. At this point in my life, when I'm like, I was telling you, like I was like 11 or whatever, becoming a member of the church, getting my first Bible. Um, like I didn't have two thoughts about Muslims, and I had barely maybe a half a thought about Jewish people, or that is a religion. Like it's like Hanukkah is a thing. It's like Christmas. I mean, that's what kids think about.
Yeah.
They don't think about. You get older and you start learning some history stuff, and you start getting a little more context and whatnot. But like, I did notice there was all these different churches in Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge, 28,000 people.
Right.
Live in Oak Ridge, and nobody has the same understanding of what they're saying. Like, is it why? I did wonder, even at a young age, why isn't there clarity, right? Which ended up being, one of the central questions eventually that would get me to the point of my deconstruction, right? Where, I'm 11 years old and I'm reading the Bible for the first time and having questions about, like, now that I'm thinking about this analytically, like Pastor Bob Edmonds had me do, I'd like to take a little bit of time and think about the logistics of all the stuff in Genesis. And I remember asking my dad, and he was just like, I don't think he was ready,
He wasn't ready. You're too young to have those questions. Yeah.
Well, no, he wasn't that. Dad wasn't ever like that. He would never have. He wouldn't talk to me like that. I just don't think he was ready,
Right.
to have an answer for it. Because if I remember correctly, I don't remember exactly what he said. I remember being dissatisfied with what he said. There was a feeling of like that doesn't sound good to me. And I think it was something to the standpoint of like, we don't really know what it was, or how it could have been done. We just know that this is like a story of the Bible, and like it was very non-committal on anything. And I was just like, okay, well, why is it in here? Telling us what it is. But this is really before I probably could understand what a metaphor was, So, but it's my first time that I'm actually like saying, okay, really, two of every animal. I have a wildlife treasury. You remember those things?
Was that the card?
Yeah. So it was like a green box. I
had that.
You had that too? Yeah, and it had these little cards.
Yeah.
It was like almost like postcard looking things, and then like you would have a
Yeah.
really good
Like
looking
a
picture of,
recipe box.
yeah, and then on the back you would have like a really detailed description of what you're looking at and things like that. And it was just so cool. And so I have this,
Yeah.
and I'm like, every animal, two of everyone, huh?
Yeah, and it's funny because I always I don't think I ever really thought that story was anything more than metaphorical.
Oh, that's a funny one, Ed.
I don't ever I don't ever I just don't ever remember thinking I actually, so you need to know this. In my office, I have hanging on my wall above the mantle, fireplace is used and takes up space, a tapestry looking piece of material that came out of the fellowship hall at Trinity they closed, and it is Noah's Ark and all of these animals.
Mm-hmm.
I love it, not because I love the story of Noah's Ark,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
because I
yeah.
love the animals.
Listen,
And
I like the story of Noah's Ark. As far as a story is concerned, it's just it makes for a fun
yeah,
mythological story, like if you read
yeah,
if you like to read mythology, right? If you like, I remember reading Cherokee mythology when I was in junior high, and I mean, like
yeah,
you read this kind of stuff. This is part of the ongoing education that you're reading about, a people that lived here before, European colonialism wiped out their religions, and you're reading about like their different gods and how they saw things, and you're just like, dang, so then you're all of a sudden, maybe that is my first time I'm thinking about really like religions that don't, they don't exist now, but like Rhett will talk about like just being, well, we're the right ones, so at least even there, I
yeah.
did have some kind of like feeling of it, like, but the difference again from you and me when we're talking about like Noah's Ark, right? You were not a Sunday school kid.
I was as a small child for a while, and went to VBS. I love Vacation Bible School.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that I wasn't taught those stories. It just, first off, they were always in cartoon form.
Yeah,
the or
I don't.
felt.
But hold on, I don't. Okay, maybe that doesn't mean anything to you, but to a 5-year-old, the cartoon version of this means it's more true. Like we were.
No, I don't remember feeling. I guess I understood cartoons to be what they were, which was
Well, yeah,
cartoons.
yeah. But like, okay, so when I'm 5, 6 years old and I'm in the children's, like, this isn't before youth. This is like I'm a child. Like,
Absolutely.
it's like basically
Yeah.
baby. It's basically babysitting with like a Jesus picture to color, or something like that, and some toys to play with while your parents go to actual Sunday school and have adult conversations.
Right.
Um. So no, I mean, like, we're associating Santa Claus, like is in the cartoons. We're believing in Santa Claus at this time, right?
Well, yeah. So
we're
you have to
I'm not saying that the cartoons made us believe. I'm saying this is just part of the normal thing. We believe because
No, I agree.
we're told to believe, right? And the
But there was
cartoons made us feel good about it.
Joe Camel.
Yeah, it's a very Joe Camel kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So, but and this may be a part of the difference is because, so my family moved around a lot. I like to tell people, I was conceived in Virginia, born in Alabama. My first birthday was in Texas. I don't remember any of those places.
Sure,
because
yeah.
we moved to Tennessee. By the time I was
before
3
your
or so.
brain could store that.
Right. And then I know that it was around 3 because I had eye surgery, and it was in Johnson City, and that was the place in the world you went at that time. And the so my experience in the church Sunday school kind of thing really didn't start until maybe kindergarten. I went to kindergarten in my church, and then we moved. So it really didn't start until second or third grade.
Okay, so
for
like
me.
for me, I was in the church as a baby in the nursery.
Right.
Went to the room that was right next to that, which was like the little kid, but we still were watching cartoons, and like I guess
Yeah.
there was a point, maybe not the modern day kid, but there's a point when they were watching like a bunch of Veggie Tales. We didn't do Veggie Tales. We had there was a different brand. I remember. I could tell you just what it looks like too if I could see it.
Yeah, Carla probably can tell you that too.
Yeah,
'cause
yeah,
she too
yeah,
grew up
yeah,
in
yeah.
that.
So I'm speaking Carla's language because we're talking about that actual church that she went to. So like,
That's right.
that lower half of the church, the Sunday school section, was where all the kids were all the time, right? So you had,
Ed, my youth director's name when I was a senior in high school was Steve Martin.
um,
Sorry,
yeah.
his comment was.
Oh, sorry. I was riffing on the church experience, but anyway, so yeah, so
Yeah.
like it wasn't maybe every Sunday, but especially considering my family, right? Like with my grandmother and my
Yeah.
grandfather and my
You had
mother's
generations in the church.
right. So like believing was more than even just like the indoctrination of it being put in my face. It was like reaffirmed left and right and left and right. And then even when I
Yeah.
went to my father's parents, my grandfather and grandmother up there, they were
Right.
Southern Baptists. And I remember having discussions with my mother about like the differences in their beliefs. I think about it now, and she didn't really nail it, but she gave me a bunch of superficial stuff that would make me understand, right? I think
Yeah,
back in those
sure.
days, like why people would get dunked versus sprinkled as a baby and then reaffirmed as a, like these kind of things, right?
Right.
But that was my experience really with like, these two different kinds of things. But like, listen, it was never an option that it wasn't true.
Right. Yeah, and that was not my experience because again, we had this earlier. My experience in the church was scattered throughout my childhood. It wasn't consistent.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I learned to adapt to when I was a pastor, besides the grind of every Sunday, I got to be ready. There's that. Uh, do you ever have a day when you just wish that concert, when that gig wouldn't happen because you just need a
Yeah,
break?
yeah. So like those days do happen, and I just take off. I can't, I get a sub. That
Yeah,
happened not
exactly.
too long.
And
Yeah, you can't do
it
that.
can be overwhelming. Yeah, it
Yeah,
can be overwhelming at times. But the other thing I had to adjust to was people who have lived in the house that their parents lived in, and they're in their 70s, and they're
Mhm.
living in the house they grew up in. And
And the
the
church
old
that they
home
grew up
place
in, right?
and the church they grew up in. I remember in Pikeville, I was filling in for somebody teaching a Sunday school class, and it was a group of older, much older folks. And I asked the question because I really didn't have much time to prepare for it because it was kind of a last second thing, and I went in. So let's just talk about what does church mean to you? And this lady said, this building. And I said, well, tell me about that. And she said, well, I was born right there. And she pointed out the window. She was 88 years old.
Yeah,
That was the only church she knew. That was the only community she knew. That was, I wasn't, so I didn't as I said, I lived in Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee all by the time I was in the second grade.
sure.
And my sister and my brothers had lived in Virginia and also Pennsylvania before that for months. So I wasn't used to the concept of somebody living in the same place for 70 years. To this
Yeah,
day, the longest I've ever lived in a community was the 10 years I was in
Okay. Yeah, so you've been
90.
around, but like, my grandparent, like my grandfather was there when that church was like first started and
Yeah, in the
passed
40s.
and passed, when as still a member of that church before it had shut down.
Yeah.
And it
What
was
year did he die?
95.
Oh, long before it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a long before it closed.
Yeah, but my grandmother lived through the closing and the migration
2008.
to
Yeah.
First United Methodist Church over that way, and it was a
Yeah.
big ordeal for them, man. That was drama, and I wasn't even in it. I just kind of was back giggling,
Right there.
but it was
I was
some serious. There was some serious like goings on, and then my mom was very very like, because she was a baby in that church and grew up her whole life, and so when that lady says this building, my mom had a very this building, what is church, this building attitude on it.
And now I drive by it last week and can't read the sign because it's in Spanish. So.
But let me just say, that my mom changed her tune, and when I say tune, I mean tune. Once she started realizing that the choir was giving her a little more at the first church than it was over at the Trinity United, because she's into that. So
what do you mean they were giving her more? That
it was a better production, and
yeah. Well,
and you got that cathedral, right? So we got some natural sound bounce like you wouldn't believe. That's not to say Trinity had pretty good sound bounce, but yeah,
better than some.
So, bigger procedure, is church a little bit more money,
A little bit more.
Yeah, a lot more. But I mean, so once she started getting used to those production values, I think that she changed her tune a little bit and started really liking going to First United. So she's not bitter. All right, nobody's gonna care about this. Let's move on with Rhett and Alex
with Jesus,
idolaters,
but they believe,
Yeah.
they believe that it's works and faith. It's not just faith alone,
Sure.
and so they don't have the grace thing figured out. At the very least, I need to introduce them to the real truth, right?
Mhm.
And so I knew they were going to be there, and so I was like, well, I'm going to do a Bible study. I'm going to go from Galatians, right? Because Galatians talks about that, basically how it's about faith and and not about works.
I know, Ed.
And
I know.
it was one of those things that in retrospect, I was thinking about them, and everyone else in the Bible study, the other regulars, knew that I was kind of preaching to them from this perspective. And I think back on that, and I'm like, I brought a lot of spiritual pride to that situation because I thought I had the correct perspective and just assumed they don't agree with me.
Yeah,
about
this is what he's talking about.
And they're definitely wrong. I'm bringing them in to give them the truth. When you think that you've got the truth, and it's a truth that impacts everyone, it applies to everyone. It's really difficult to not take pride in that and to begin to see yourself as better. I mean, I'm not saying that all Christians think that they're better than other people.
Mhm.
I'm just saying for me,
For your experience.
I remember lying there when I was in college and thinking how grateful I was that I basically believed the right thing about
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, well, I often parody
I heard that.
Christian denominations with that exact thought.
You heard? What do you mean you heard that?
I heard that very same attitude and words from the Campus Crusade folks, that they're grateful that they found Campus Crusade because down the wrong path because they were in this church or that church, or there was this absolutism that this is the only way that you can have faith, is the way they're teaching it.
Sure.
And
I mean, he's saying he's prideful, in being right, but I mean, like, this is this is some self-righteous crap. You know,
Well, yeah,
and
and I appreciate his honesty about, this is how I felt at the time.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I appreciate this too because
And
again,
and
humility is a part of the equation.
yeah, absolutely. And I think so for me, listening to that, one of the things that I'm thinking is, as a pastor, I never go into anything thinking I know. Um, I do Bible studies, and I tell them when we start, my method is not to sit here and tell you what you're supposed to believe, because all I can really do is let's talk. I'm going to learn from. And if you're coming at people with the belief that you are absolutely right, you will never hear what they have to say. You will never grow from them. You'll never experience that person because you are too concerned about fixing, to getting them to believe. You've got an agenda that isn't about them. And I think he came to that realization.
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate like this is, I guess, we're going to show some Pastor Billy appreciation here, and maybe this is why I've always known this because I've even as uh, a youth, right? Like I've said it before on the stream, is that you were my favorite youth pastor of all the youth pastors that we went through, and I think part of it was your humility about the stuff, right?
Well, I was an idiot too.
Well, but I mean,
I mean,
but you weren't like,
I hear you. Yes.
yeah.
I always believed that the best thing I could do for you guys was to give you the opportunity to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I had the answers, but that we would have conversation about, we being the group, and we could learn from each other. I've always believed that is the teaching method, because it's the way I learn.
Right. I mean,
Um,
you're probably learning more from us than we were from you, though, because we at that age, you know it all.
that's right, you do. And Rhett says something later on about the same thing, and that is, he talks about how uh, he had this attitude that because he knew he was so right, that I can't remember how he said it, but he talks about that idea that,
Has he gotten there yet? Did we already talk? I mean, we can just play.
he hasn't said it yet. No.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and play.
But it's like
Right.
what
Yeah.
man, what are the odds? How lucky you are.
And with no irony at all.
Yeah.
Of course, I was, a 20-year-old kid, but I was lying there in bed and I was like, man, like, not only am I a Christian, but I am the right kind of Christian. Like, I believe the right stuff. I'm in the right denomination. I'm in the right ministry. Like, even amongst the ministries here on campus, I'm in the one that is the most serious about this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm so thankful that I'm right about everything. Essentially, is what I was saying.
Yeah, those are my nightly affirmations too. I'm just so grateful for being right about everything. It's fascinating. There is an interesting paradox there, the so-called preface paradox, where people they can think that they're right about everything whilst also thinking they're wrong about at least one thing. It's called the preface paradox because at the beginning of a book, authors will often say, if there are any mistakes in here, like, I'm sorry. But they've gone through meticulously and checked every single one. So
Right.
if I went through every single one of your beliefs individually and said, do you think this is true? Yes. Do you think this is true? Yes. Because I'm going through your beliefs. So definitionally, every one of them you
Right.
say yes. But if at the end I then say, but do you think at least one of those beliefs is actually false? If you're a bit humble in any respect, you go, yeah, of course, one of them's false.
Yeah.
So you've got this paradox of thinking they're all true, but at least one of them's false. It's got to do with like probabilistic
Yeah, right.
certainty, probably. But yeah, there's that feeling that you've got God on your side as well, and you sort
Yeah.
of go to sleep slightly prideful, slightly content, slightly happy. Where does that certainty like come from? Was it the result of Bible study and consideration of different groups and denominations? Was it more sociological, just sort of the way you were brought up? Were you cognizant of the factors which led you to be in the correct denomination and the correct student group?
Yeah. So not at the time. I think that what I would have said is that I had been taught the right stuff from my parents, and I had been in the right environment growing up. I think that ultimately there's a few factors that contributed to it. I think number one, certainty is a really important aspect of religious faith, and especially Christianity, and especially evangelical Christianity, because I think that agreeing with a set of propositional statements is actually what if you ask somebody to describe, they might say, well, it's about a relationship with Jesus. But if you're like, well, yeah, but what does that mean? These propositional statements come up. It's like, well, I believe this about Jesus. If any church worth its salt has a "we believe" place on their website, right? That's what I thought, right? And so I think that being certain and being right about these things comes at a premium. It is really, really important. So I thought that being certain was very important. And then I just think I had the type of personality, came from the type of family where we kind of thought we had it figured out, right? Like this is a big problem for me now, is to not settle on what I think I figured out, to be really doubtful of my particular perception of the world, to say, well, I know that I'm wrong about some stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm not sure about, but I can struggle with wanting to latch on to certain ideas and be like, well, I've got this figured out, and you start trying to build this worldview. So I think it's a combination of the environment, where certainty was really important, and then my personality, the way that I gravitated towards that.
We'll get back to Rhett in just a moment, but first,
All right.
do you trust the news?
Any comments before we skip over this ad?
I think he's about to get to the thing I was going to talk about. So.
To do. Ground News aggregates
Ground
thousands
News.
of local and international news outlets, all news/AlexOC. Take a look at this story about some US lawmakers.
Oh boy,
1%
Alex.
of the news. You could have missed this story altogether. And Ground News miss based on the news that you usually read. Nowhere is doing news aggregation quite
One
like
day,
Ground News. Try it out for yourself by going
we'll
to
actually be doing things like this,
ground.news/AlexOC, or by
maybe
scanning the
Billy,
QR
and
code
then
that's
Wesley
currently on the
Curry
screen. Use my link to get 40%
will be,
off their unlimited access Vantage plan. And with that
more
said,
righteous
back
in
to
his
Rhett. And what was
accusations
this
of
particular
us.
kind of Christianity? You said you were a Protestant.
That's right.
Were you in a particular denomination? Were there particular beliefs that you held that most Protestants would sort of disagree with you about?
What I would say is we called ourselves non-denominational, but from a theological perspective, we would have most aligned with just the Baptist Church.
Sure.
So we were probably a little bit more Reformed Baptist, right? So there was a strong, not as strong as you would have in like a PCA church, a Presbyterian church in America, about predestination. But, we were kind of soft Calvinists, like 4-point Calvinists, and so we definitely believe that God had predetermined essentially who was his child, which was interesting to do in the context of evangelism.
Yeah,
to
I was going
believe
to
that.
ask, like, how does that affect when you go onto the beach and spring break and you're talking to people? Do you just have this thought like, well, I hope I happen to bump into the people that God's already preordained to come to faith?
Yeah, I think yes. I think the analogy that I would have used is that I'm planting a bunch of seeds.
Yep.
And some of them are sort of predetermined to grow and to flourish.
Determinism, Ed.
And
it's
that's
biblical.
not up to me. I'm just the one that's planting the seeds.
But then if it's not up to you,
and it's certainly not Methodist.
Is it like if you don't plant those seeds, then
they wouldn't get saved?
Then they wouldn't get saved? I mean, it kind of seems that this whole predestination idea seems to undermine the motivation for going.
I really, this was probably my key, like, theological conundrum in college, because I was close with guys who were Reformed in this way, and were Calvinists, and they would be like, listen, it's just very clear in the scriptures that who he predestines. It's like, and so I remember sitting on the porch one time with my friend.
Is it clear?
No, it's not at all.
So this is where we can maybe have that quick Wesleyan Calvinist.
So Wesley completely and utterly disagreed with Calvin on this.
Right.
The idea of predestination was not something Wesley agreed with, and the other part of that is Wesley focused a lot on grace, and grace is a gift given without merit, whereas Calvin focused on this concept of predestination, and there was a bit of conversation in I don't think they actually met. I don't even their lives overlap, but Wesley certainly addressed Calvin's thoughts that were we born sinners or did we become sinners, and that was a part of the debate. But the concept of predestination is something you certainly see in the Baptist Church and the friends that I had that were in the Campus Crusade, and it like Rhett, it falls apart. Well, what are we doing as a church? But the flip side of that is the American Protestant work ethic comes out of the concept of predestination, because the idea was that if you were one of the, as Wesley would point out, the 144,000 that were predestined, then God would bless you on. Therefore, you should work the tail end off, because if you worked hard and you rose up in the ladders and you
then you were
wealth,
you were one of the ones.
Then you were, because that's the only way that could possibly.
You were predestined to be one of the ones who chose to work.
So apparently, Elon Musk is, by that, and yeah, well.
Well, the whole billionaires and working is that's a dubious claim anyway.
Yeah, he invested money that he.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's busy, but it's like, if you're that important to your job, you wouldn't be able to be the CEO of all of those companies and also do government stuff too. I don't
That's right.
care. I don't care how bad you want us to perceive you as some kind of super genius.
Just like there was a Tesla leader of, I'm not sure what rank he was, what level he was in the, said, our problem is not the product. The product is good. Elon Musk is our problem right now. So
yeah.
So the idea, though, that the predestination, I think Rhett, it leads to this other idea that I'm getting at, was if you have this absolutism belief that everything is exactly right, that everything you've been taught is what he's saying, the way he's describing it, that you're right. When anything breaks that mold, the whole thing crumbles.
I think he gets to that point though, right? Like I got to that point when and I didn't even have that, I guess
Right, that wouldn't have been
dogmatic
something
beliefs. Like it didn't even take that. It was just more like this inconsistent.
Right. But imagine you have invested everything you have into this house of cards, and somebody takes one of the,
yeah, I mean sunken cost syndrome or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's.
I think a lot of us in the United States have sunken cost syndrome.
We all do in something.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
I love the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I'm not going to stop loving the Pittsburgh Pirates. I love the Steelers, and I'm not going to stop loving.
That's not sunken cost syndrome in the way that I'm talking about it. But this will end.
Yeah, that we're so invested in something.
Right. This will end our political rant for the segment. Yeah. We'll keep it vague this time around. Anyway.
Talking about that. So, okay, well, all right. If I want to believe the Bible, and again, I bought into univocality, and I was able to reinterpret the passages that would question this perspective in light of the ones that I had gravitated towards, which is how you build, a systematic theology to begin with. But I remember sitting with them and saying, okay, I can agree that God preordained a certain number of people to be his children, which definitely means that a certain number of people are not predestined to be his children. In fact, statistically speaking, the majority of people who've ever lived and live right now, and they're going to be in hell. So I believe that because the Bible says it. But
God, this was a major sticking point for me. Just the whole, like, you know, when we start talking about hell, heaven and hell. I think maybe heaven and hell broke me about as much as anybody when I actually just finally started sitting down thinking about what it could even be.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with what Rhett's about to say about that, because I don't believe in hell. I just don't. I don't buy that as a reality.
Well, this is interesting.
We have too much, the concept of hell is not really something that Jesus really speaks of. There's even the concept of hell throughout the Bible is kind of interpreted through the lens of things like Dante.
Yeah, the Divine Comedy.
The literature. Yeah, the literature that comes through, that's where we get the images we have of the devil. That's where we get all of this stuff. It's that through that lens that we look at the Bible and we say, oh, well, this is what that means. And it was not something that has always been a focus in Christianity all the time. It certainly is. Ed would have pointed out this earlier on, saying level of fear, and that was always, oh, well, this is a way we can get these. We can tell them, make sure we pull that out and say, look at this one verse here says, if you don't, then you're going to be burning in hell. You're going to have this coals leaped on you, or there's a few verses here and there. It's certainly not the focus of what Jesus taught.
Sure.
And it's not even really the focus of what Paul taught.
Yeah, Ed, I
though
would
he does
say
mention it.
I would say that the problem of evil is almost the same question as thinking about the validity of heaven and hell. It's very similar when you think about it. I mean, there's the thinking conceptually about heaven and hell and what it is, which can like make you like, okay. But then there's also like the concept of it being like all the bad people go here and all the good people go here, and you've separated them, and what does that mean? Right? Like, so then you've got the problem of evil intertwined with that, right?
And I think so. I mentioned this in my sermon Sunday that when Christians get so tied into these absolute beliefs about kinds of, they get to the point where the fear is in them that Ed was talking about, fear and guilt, things that you motivated by. If that's your motivation, that is new, different, unusual, you don't understand it, then you attribute it to evil or the devil or something like that. I think I told you this story. I'll make it real brief. A lady my mother was friends with picked up an Alan Parsons Project 8-track, looked on the back, and there's a song called Psycho. And she didn't know what that word was. So her first thought was, is this satanic?
Right.
I mean, the freaking name of the album was Eye in the Sky.
Right. Which, some people could say the eye in the sky is satanic.
But Alan Parsons wouldn't say that.
But some people could say, it's the guy looking at traffic. So
yeah, there's a song in there that was about prayer. It just didn't use that word.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah. But if that's where your mind goes immediately, it must be satanic, then there's something wrong.
There's something deep that was ingrained in you early to believe that kind of stuff. So, but I mean, like, what I'm telling you, Billy, for me, it was. Uh-oh, have we lost Billy?
I'm back.
Yeah, we lost you for a second there. You were frozen again.
Yeah.
It must be storming up your way. It was a little rough on that last segment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get into. I think they're about to do, heaven and hell anyway here.
And he's
I
also
like
about to say
Paul.
something important.
Because I was a little bit nervous. I was like, but doesn't that kind of make God an asshole? And they were like,
Hold on, let's
no.
rewind that a little bit.
Yeah, I
Does
think that's important to hear.
Believe that because the Bible says it. But being the majority of people who've ever lived and live right now, and they're going to be in hell. So I believe that because the Bible says it. But, and I like paused because I was a little bit nervous. I was like, but doesn't that kind of make God an asshole? And they were like, no, no, no. He's just like, you can't understand. First of all, we all deserve to be in hell.
Mm.
The fact that he would save, he's justified in not saving anyone.
Yeah, that's the line, isn't it?
And so then I was like, yeah, but he decided to create a world in which these beings would exist. Like he still made that choice. Doesn't that still kind of make him an asshole? So I was having thoughts like that at like 20 years old, but was able to continue to carry like a cognitive dissonance that allowed me to still be a very strong Christian and just be like, okay, there are things that I don't understand. God's got that figured out. That'll be the first question I ask him when I get to heaven.
Yeah, and of course there's no Christian who doesn't have thoughts like that swimming around in their minds too. It's
bullshit, Alex. There are plenty of Christians who don't have any thoughts swimming around in their head.
Some people, those are questions that they just retain, and like you say, think, I'll ask God when I see him. For others, it's like the first domino falling apart. I'm interested in what your view of hell was at the time when you said that most people are probably going to hell. What did you think hell was at the time when you were around 20?
I had talked myself into, mostly as a result of that struggle I was having, that it was probably some sort of, I basically became, without really reading too much about it, an annihilationist.
Yeah.
And so just the idea that people who don't know God, who are not his children, will probably go through some sort of...
So the fun part about this is that he's just like, he's doing that thing. He's, it isn't that far along ago that he was saying during this time that he was like, I was so happy that I was so right,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But he's also like, again,
already these questions.
He's answering questions, right? Like he didn't have the answers, so he's like, I mean, this is apologia, right? Like this is
right.
You're looking for a question, or you have an answer, so you need a question that fits it, right?
Right, and they get to that too. I think it's very important that's the challenge. I think that anybody has, that if you're not, first off, the guy that I had you watching some Dan McLaughlin.
Yeah.
One of the things that he points out regularly is we all negotiate with we all look at the Bible and say, this is, I either have to decide this is true. Slavery is throughout the Bible. It's never condemned.
The book of Job, as Ed was saying, is crazy town.
The book of Job. Yeah, and the book of Job, most scholars believe that the last part was added because it was unpalatable that he would have lost everything, and that was the way it was going to end up, because it made God ask. In the end, he gets everything back.
Yeah, but like, so we watched early on in the series, we watched a Dark Matter 2525 video, and he did a critique on the book of Job, like a modern day version of it, and then also like some 13 years ago he did one of those cartoons or whatever, and he talks about it as being written by like a true psychopath, or at least the worst like kind of abuser would have written this, right?
It's a bizarre story, really.
Well,
is.
but I mean, it's a bizarre story because, well, it's in the Bible, and again, this speaks to how the Bible is not clear, right?
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with Old Testament, New Testament conflict, but nonetheless, it's still, a collection of books that was put together for people to be like, this is the guidebook, right?
Yeah, and I think so. I think it also has the conflict between Old Testament and Old Testament, or New Testament, New Testament.
Yeah, well, there's plenty
I
of
think there's
contradiction from that's inter
right,
testament. We don't have to go intra. We
right,
can go inter
and
testament for the contradictions.
that's right.
But the Old Testament
And
to me
Rhett
is
mentioned,
clearly has a bigger a bigger volume of contradictions to at least the God is love, the God is omnibenevolent message.
yes, I would absolutely agree with that. And a part of that is, so he used the word univocality. It kind of skipped over it. It didn't make a big deal of it, but the concept of that it was all written by one voice, and he believed that. He believed that this was all one voice. In the Old Testament, in particular, so many of those books were written by many people and piled many years later, many centuries later, like Genesis.
Mhm.
They and this is not something that I'm just some radical that's heard this. Seminaries have taught JEDP is, when it comes to the book of Genesis, that's Yahwist, Elohimist, Deuteronomist, and Priestly. And these are the four schools of thought that were writing these texts, and they eventually were put together. And so it's only natural then that they're not all going, because they come from different perspectives.
Right. I mean, that's part of it. But even like the book of Job, just looking at it in itself, right? It's not just
Yeah,
like it's not
and
a
it's a very different book.
I mean, we're talking about angels that are like, "Hey God, we don't believe that you can show us an example of true loyalty or whatever," and so then God's like, "You want to bet?"
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah,
then,
it's a bizarre story. Yeah,
and
I
then
agree.
okay, and then God's like, "Okay, if you don't believe me, just go do these awful things," right? Which
Here you go.
which if we start from the whole question of predestination and if God is omniscient and omnipotent, and this is definitely not an omnibenevolent act, but but if you're omniscient, first off, you have these angels questioning whether this is the thing, when in fact they're right in front of God, like they can see who God is and what God does and his works or whatever, so they can't just
That's right.
believe him. So then they go and they test Job or whatever, and like just ruin this dude. And this is
Yeah. So I was just thinking about, so in the Old Testament you have basically three kinds of literature.
Well, this is the be loyal or die part of the Old Testament.
Well, the three
right?
kinds of literature though are on a broader thing. They're the historical literature. So the law, it's all about passing the law down to the people and living into that. So that's all of the things that historical, that are telling this long story. And then there are the prophets, which are Isaiah, Jeremiah, the 12 minor prophets at the end. I'm sure I left somebody out there. Then there is wisdom literature, and Job is actually seen as a wisdom literature piece. So I don't know that I would even, if anybody's trying to tell me, oh, this is a factual story, it doesn't fit with what kind of literature it is. So first off, there's that. But secondly, it still is a troublesome.
The general idea,
the concept, yeah. If you wrote this as fiction, you're.
Yeah, but like what Dark Matter 2525 was saying is like this is a sociopath, who's saying, we might watch that video sometime just for some fun, just maybe his cartoon version of it, because they're just so silly and scandalous.
He did a really good. Is that the guy who did the Sodom and Gomorrah story.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the same kind of stuff. But
Very
like,
well done. It was very well done.
yeah, the Book of Job. He does a great job of portraying like God in his little comics, because God has these things that he wants to do, right? Or he's not sure about what he wants to do, and then he has this little imp kind of angel that's always asking him, like, "Don't you know everything? Like, you know, you're supposed to know everything, right?" And just like in that right there, like always is just the funniest comedic bit when it's just like, you already know this, and he's like, "Oh yeah." So anyway,
About the Devil and Bob.
Jeffrey is the name of the little angel, I believe. So we're up against it. Let's watch this little last part about does hell exist, and then with maybe a couple comments, and then we'll save it on for the next week.
All right.
Sort of torment, but it won't be forever, and then they will cease to exist.
Yeah, and that,
Oh yeah,
that hell.
we didn't even get to the part I was going to ask you about.
annihilation.
Annihilation. Is there any? Would there be any biblical reference to this? There's barely even hell.
Ooh. Yeah, Sheol is mentioned, and people kind of say that's the same thing. It's not really the same. There's mention of fiery pits or something like that. At one, I don't know about the
But
concept of
annihilation.
eternal torment.
Okay.
Say more than just the word.
Yeah.
Is the view that people will be annihilated if
Yeah.
they don't go to heaven. They sort of cease to exist, maybe after a period of suffering of some sort.
Right.
I've always been quite attracted to that idea because of the like classical Thomistic arguments for the existence of God, which have God as like the ground of being.
Mhm.
If God is the foundation of being itself and everything that is participates in him, then if hell is something like separation from God, and if God is the ground of all being, then what does it mean to not be with God? It means to not be. It means to not exist.
Yeah, right.
So I've always thought philosophically there's good grounding for considering separation with God to be the same thing as not existing. Because to
Yeah.
exist is to participate in God's existence, as some of the classical philosophers would put it.
Yeah.
But that's not as motivational as the fire and brimstone
Yeah.
imagery. And presumably in your outreach, you wouldn't push too heavy on the hell stuff, especially
No.
considering that you thought most people were going there anyway and there's nothing they could do
Yeah,
about
right. And I think that it's interesting to see. I'm still a fan of Christian apologetics. It's fascinating to me
Yeah.
to see the way that, and especially now, there wasn't nearly as much just apologetics media as there is now when I was deconstructing, because this mostly happened to me in the late aughts and 2010, 2011. And nobody was there were people writing books, but nobody was making internet content about this stuff. But I kind of dip in and dip out, and to see the way the conversation around hell is evolving is fascinating, because it is a really, it's like if you've got, if you're selling a product, it's like the one thing.
I would say the more alternatives that they have on this kind of thing, the better for the apologist. Right?
You mean the more ideas
about like some kind of hell, like, so apologists look for like ways for things to maybe exist in a framework that works within like parameters that they've given up on, like, for instance, evolution, which I think we'll talk about that eventually, but like they have to or the Big Bang, right? The Big Bang is true, but the Big Bang happened because God said bang and it happened, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. You were asking earlier about the annihilation thing, and I think what Alex said, it was interesting because as an atheist, I would assume that you do say, well, when I am dead, I'm done, So it's weird to call that annihilation. That's just death, right?
Well, no, I mean, he's talking about the soul. So like,
Okay.
okay. So like
If you don't believe there's a soul, then
no, Alex is attracted to the idea because this idea of annihilation is kind of new, right? And it's
okay.
also a little bit more gentle, but it's also still very like, right? It's like,
Well, yeah, it was interesting he threw in, and there's a little bit of torment.
well,
Just
he
go
said he said maybe there's maybe in this because
right.
like maybe there is some kind of torment at first and then the soul is just extinguished. Eternal suffering just sounds so ridiculous that it couldn't be real. This is what the apologists will do. Eternal suffering doesn't sound like it could be real because God is good, and eternal suffering sounds like something so evil that God couldn't even do it, right? You see what I'm saying, right? So the apologists will be like, so what they'll do is they'll suffer a little bit, and then the souls will just annihilate. Whereas all the souls that believed would they're sitting and talking with God and having the time of their life,
Right.
or the time of their afterlife.
Let me just the one thing that Alex said there, though, that I really connect with, and it's not from the philosophers that he's talking, but a theologian called Paul Tillich, who was a German theologian, came to America because of World War II and all that stuff. Paul Tillich also spoke of the ground of our being, and there's another one, and I could get in these two mixed up, and I'm not sure I can tell you the name of the other. But the other phrase for that was the beyond in our midst, and that was something I learned in a philosophy class, and that really connected with me. The idea that there was people that believed that God was the out there, distant, and all. And for me, there was this: if God's really about our existence and being, then we tell children, God's everywhere, right? Um, I think that makes more sense to me, that there's not this like doesn't have to be this thing that's out there. It's the ground of our being, and or the beyond in our midst was the other one. Um, so his concept of that, when Alex was saying that, that's what was going through my head, and I thought, that I could see that being something that people would really be drawn to.
Right, because
The
again,
concept.
yeah, annihilation it's more humane, right? They're trying.
That's right.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. They're trying to. This is a whitewashing, so to speak. Now, this is not to say that there's a lot of talk about what actual hell is in the Bible, but I'm saying that there's also not talk of annihilation. There's like where the soul just ceased to exist.
Right. Right.
This is again another bit of apologia, right? Where
Yeah. And I was reading for sermon prep, and there's a pastor who's my favorite preacher. He's over in Charlotte, um, and he was talking about the scripture was that he was talking about was from Revelation, the last couple of chapters, that talks about there would be a new heaven, and he made the point that people often think that it's about some physical place where people go and you hang out with the people you knew in on the earth and all this, and he said, but it's not about that. And then so you go back to what Alex was saying.
that doesn't even make
What
sense to me
what
though. Like even if you're
right.
considering the people that will go or will not go, right, as like part of your heavenly promise. Well,
Yeah.
you're going to be really disappointed when you get there.
That's right. And what he was saying was that, and this is again a theologian who is preaching to his congregation and speaking to other pastors in this blog, but the idea is that it's about being with God,
Right. That's
not
what.
about punishment, not about, and like I said, that connects to what Alex was saying too as well.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, so, like, if you're coming from the standpoint of heaven, as I will be with my people, I will see them again one day, and that's listen, I understand that this is. I think that this is like maybe the main reason why people want to believe an afterlife is because they want to see they want to say that they'll see their people again. And this time it'll
I
be
wouldn't
different.
I wouldn't argue with that on some levels. I think that I remember when my mom died, my brother was very concerned and asked, "Is mom going to heaven, or is mom saved, or something?" I think is mom going? Because he was not around mom very much, and he didn't know about her. And he was very concerned about. But in that place, what you do is you tell the person, yes, absolutely.
Sure.
Whether
sure.
you know or not, whether you have this concept that your mother believed in or not.
But let's put a hypothetical out there.
Okay.
So your brother, let's say, is one of the predetermined, right?
Yeah, he likes black and white things. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's done the things that like the modern American Christian thinks. He's worked 70 hours a week. He has got his donations to Trump going. He knows he's going to heaven, right?
Are you saying my mic is bad?
I don't know if it's the mic. I think it's Discord. It might be just a setting that we have to do with, because the same thing happens with when you're on the Xbox mic. It just the Xbox headset mic is a little more grainy sounding. Your mic sounds better, but both of them cut off, and I don't know if it's a setting, but yeah, we miss. Oh, okay. It might be that we need to turn up your gain, because it might be that your voice falls off as the volume of your voice falls off. So it might be something like that. But nonetheless,
we'll see if it happens. Go on.
To finish the thought. So like your brother is going. He knows he's going to heaven, but he doesn't know his mom is going to be there, right? And his assumption is that he knows some things about his mom. And maybe this isn't your family, but I'm just saying, like, he's worried about it enough to think that it couldn't happen. So, like, he gets there and it doesn't happen that she's there. Is it still heaven, right? So your only answer there is you didn't go to see your mom. You went to be with God, right?
It's
like don't be thinking about like your family, but like I think that most people would believe that like the major motivation in wanting to believe in heaven is that this show ain't over.
I would agree with that.
We will see each other again.
Yeah, I agree. That's why there's this, especially among evangelicals, urgency that, if I love you, then I've got to do everything I can to make sure that you don't go to hell and you do go to heaven. And it doesn't matter if I'm mean and cruel to you as long as it gets you there. It doesn't matter if I'm hateful to you as long as I convince you that it doesn't matter if I threaten you as long as it gets you there. Which is hardly Paul's way of, even Paul said, I would sacrifice myself so that I wouldn't go to hell. But yeah, I hear what your question is there.
Right. All right. Well, we are past it now, and we have a lot more content on this to discuss, because we're just now really kind of getting into like the questions, right? Like, does hell exist?
Yeah, I think the questions that he gets into when he really starts talking about evolution, for me, it goes back to that whole House of Cards thing, but
yeah,
it was interesting because I don't relate to where he was.
Right. But again, I'm trying to bridge that gap and tell you, even me, and I was having my questions early, right? But I just to give you an example of just a little standardized, even Methodist rooted indoctrination where it's just like all of this is very, very real. You know, Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, and you know, Samson really did have superpowers until his hair was cut. You know, and these kind of things. Like Samson is a hilarious, just conceptually what children are taught about Samson. First off, Samson, and that's a crazy story. It's another one of the real bat crazy ones. You know, about, you know, be loyal or die, basically another one of those kind of Old Testament stories. But what's crazy to me about Samson is that it's such a He-Man type story. It is taught for young kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
you know, there's all kinds.
I don't hear anybody talking about it as an adult.
Yeah, no, but it is a very much but we want to talk about some very adult themes, right?
Yeah,
but it's just made to be like this, like cartoony kind of He-Man story as a child.
That's a good example.
I mean, it really is. I when I'm hearing Samson as an 8-year-old, I'm thinking this guy's like He-Man, you know, and the Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, especially when you were that age, because I know when I was in college, that's what was on.
That crap was out. Yeah. So, I mean, there are these stories in mythology, Ed, of, you know, obviously of like Hercules and Samson, and, you know, in the 80s they came out with He-Man.
That's right, and it preceded the bots.
Right. You know, the bots, the GoBots were not
Transformers. What I was thinking of.
Yeah, that was the stuff. But you know, superheroes. That's kind of why Samson is talked about in the kids stuff, because again, it's that Joe Camel thing, right? Like it's
I agree.
Here's the superhero story to get you really excited, especially you little boys that are just wanting to pretend like you have swords all the time in your hands. You know, so all right. We will do this again next week. For all of you who stuck around and watched it, you know, we appreciate your contributions and your time. Ed, thank you for your contributions. And Billy, we'll get to it next week at 10 o'clock.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, guys. We'll see y'all later.